Have you ever wondered why fear follows us, even when nothing is chasing us? Why our hearts tremble at the thought of failing and of being seen, of trying something new? Even though the danger exists only in our minds? This is the story of a boy named Elias, a boy who feared almost everything, until the day he discovered a quiet truth about living without fear. Far beyond the noise of cities, there was a small seaside village called Greyhaven. Mornings smelled of cold salt and drifting fog, and evenings ended with lanterns swaying gently in the wind. In this quiet village lived Elias, 16, gentle, thoughtful, and far more fragile than he appeared. Inside him lived a tremble he couldn't quiet. He feared the sea when it roared at night. He feared speaking in front of others. He feared trying anything new because failure felt too heavy, too humiliating, too dangerous. So he lived carefully, walking through life as though every step might break him. And little by little, his world grew smaller. At the edge of Greyhaven stood an old lighthouse, its windows worn by decades of storms. There lived Captain Rowan, a quiet man with sea-gray eyes, and a heart shaped by storms he never spoke about. One evening, Elias wandered near the lighthouse, hoping the wind would calm the tightness in his chest. Rowan looked up from repairing a lantern. "You walk like someone carrying a storm," he said softly. Elias froze. "How did you know I'm afraid?" "Fear clings to people," Rowan replied. "It changes the way they breathe." And with that, he invited Elias inside. Rowan led Elias up the winding stairs to the highest balcony of the lighthouse. The sea below roared, dark, enormous, alive. Elias's breath broke into pieces. "What do you feel?" Rowan asked. "Fear. I feel like the ground might disappear." Rowan nodded. "You think fear comes from the outside, but fear is born inside the mind, long before the world touches you." He closed his eyes and stood still in the wind. "Listen, not to the storm, but to yourself." Elias tried. His panic was loud at first, but beneath it, he found something softer. A small, steady courage he never knew existed. When he opened his eyes, the sea was still frightening, but it no longer swallowed him whole. "You see?" Rowan said. "Fear didn't leave, but it stopped leading." From that day on, Elias visited the lighthouse every morning. Rowan gave him 3 small tasks. Stand on the balcony for 1 minute. Just breathe. Just exist in the place he feared. Walk to the shoreline alone. Let the cold waves touch his boots. Play 1 short melody each morning, even if his hands shook. At first, every step felt impossible. Some days he froze halfway down the cliff path. Some days he dropped his instrument because his hands trembled too much. Some days he wanted to quit entirely. But Rowan always reminded him, courage grows in small repetitions. And slowly, very slowly, fear loosened its grip. Elias stood longer on the balcony. He walked farther along the shore. He played his melodies with steadier hands. A tiny flame had been lit inside him, and it refused to die. When summer neared its end, Greyhaven prepared for the Festival of the Sea. Lanterns hung along the shore, musicians tuned their instruments, and families gathered with warm anticipation. Someone suggested Elias should perform. The idea spread quickly. Everyone believed he was ready. Everyone except Elias. "Me, I'll shake. I'll fail." Rowan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You think fear must disappear before you act. But the sea doesn't wait for storms to pass before it moves." The night before the festival, Rowan brought him to the cliff's edge. Cold wind cut through the dark. Elias trembled. "What if I fail?" he whispered. Rowan looked toward the endless water. "You might, but it won't break you." Then he spoke the words that would stay with Elias for a lifetime. "Don't silence fear. Sing louder than it." When Elias stepped on stage the next evening, his legs trembled. His breath felt thin and fear pressed against his ribs. For a moment, he almost ran. But then he remembered the balcony, the shoreline, the wind, the months of small steps. That had carried him to this moment. So he lifted his instrument and played. The first notes wavered, soft, fragile, but the next grew steadier, and soon the melody flowed like the tide, honest, trembling, alive. The villagers listened in silence, not because the song was perfect, but because it was true. When the final note faded, warm applause washed over him, like a gentle wave. Elias stood still, breathing softly. Fear was still there, but it no longer stood in front of him. From that night onward, Elias began to change. People greeted him with respect. Children admired his quiet courage. He was no longer the boy who hid from the world, but the boy who walked through fear. With trembling steps that grew steadier each day, he continued returning to the lighthouse, continued practicing small acts of bravery, continued playing music, first for Rowan, then for Greyhaven, then for towns along the coast. Years passed, and Elias blossomed into a musician whose melodies carried the softness of someone who had learned to walk with fear instead of running from it. People often said his music felt healing, as if every note carried a piece of the courage. He built one quiet morning at a time. When asked how he learned to live without fear, Elias simply smiled and said, "I didn't. Fear still walks beside me. I just learned to walk farther than it." Fear will never disappear completely. It is part of being human, a quiet shadow that walks beside us from the moment we begin to dream. But fear is not the enemy. The real danger is letting it decide how small your life will be. When you take even the smallest step forward, when you choose movement over doubt, when you let your heart speak louder than your trembling, fear loses its throne. Courage is not the roar of someone fearless. Courage is the soft breath of someone who keeps going, even while their hands still shake. So walk gently, walk slowly if you must, but keep walking. Because every time you move toward the life you want, fear moves one step behind you. And one day, without even noticing, you will realize you didn't live without fear. You lived beyond it.